unfolding on the streets of Iran. Unbelievably courageous demonstrations underway. The Iranian people very clearly understand the damage that their own regime is doing around the world, the damage their regime is doing to the nation of Iran, and taking to the streets to protest, putting their lives at risk, absolutely literally, and we all stand strongly with the people of Iran. We're also watching. We anticipate that the Speaker will finally bring a vote to the floor to name managers for the articles of impeachment. Obviously, after saying for months and months it was urgent that President Trump be impeached, the Speaker of the House then sat on the articles for many, many weeks. Unclear exactly what she believes she accomplished by it. We seem to be in exactly the same situation we were in previously, except that we've now had this tremendous delay, which means that important pieces of work like, for example, USMCA, which obviously the House has passed, which we need to have passed in the Senate, will not be taken up because the Senate will now be focused on the impeachment trial. So we're going to continue to focus on what's necessary to make sure we're upholding our oaths to the Constitution and to make sure that we're continuing to work on the issues that matter to the American people. And with that, I would like to introduce our gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Smith, to talk about a range of issues connected to impeachment as well as USMCA.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. Just as the chair had stated, the Democrats, it looks like Nancy Pelosi is going to bring forth in releasing the articles of impeachment to the Senate this week. Of course, she has stalled this process for a long time. In fact, probably longer than the entire impeachment proceedings in the House did she hold on to the articles of impeachment. They are the party of impeachment. If you look at history, which very few people have been looking into it, 5 out of the last 6 Republican presidents, Democrat members of Congress, have filed articles of impeachment on. That's unacceptable. But it is acceptable of a party that is of impeachment. I think a question that needs to be asked as the articles of impeachment move over to the United States Senate is, will the 4 candidates for office for President of the United States be impartial jurors? 4 people that's trying to fire the President of the United States in the election process, how can they be impartial jurors sitting through that process? That's a question that should be asked. That's a question that should be addressed. And I hope those 4 senators decide to recuse themselves. That is what's proper. That is what's fitting.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Now I'd like to ask our Chief Deputy Whip, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Ferguson, to join us.
Thank you. And Liz, we appreciate the chance to be with y'all today. You know, when I travel back home and I listen to constituents and I see what's going on around the country, I think sometimes Washington thinks that impeachment is the single most important thing on the planet. Folks back home are trying to live their lives. They're trying to go to work every single day. They're raising their family. They're raising their kids, and particularly those Americans that live in rural areas. As they are trying to rebuild their lives from decades of bad policy that have helped destroy rural America, they are hungry to see us do something important like get USMCA finalized. We have exciting news on the trade front this week. It looks like the president is prepared to sign phase 1 of the China deal. But if you want to really know the cost of impeachment, besides on the credibility of the Democrats as Nancy Pelosi continues to hold these articles, the real cost is to the American people as the delay of the USMCA continues. Had we not been dealing with impeachment, we could have gotten this done sooner. And now impeachment could stand in the way of this important piece of legislation getting to the president's desk and helping the American people. And it is wrong, and we need to do everything that we can to continue to push for American families. We have been the party that has been doing that. We have not been wrapped up in a very partisan process here that has really been a real sham and a betrayal of the American people. With that, I will yield back to the chairman.
Thanks very much, Drew. And now I'd like to turn things over to our leader, Mr. McCarthy.
Well, good morning. Over the weekend, the footage coming out of Tehran was nothing short of inspiration. With complete disregard for their own safety, the Iranian people took to the streets to have their voices heard. They were demonstrating against the government with a long history of opposing its own people, and most recently intentionally misleading them about a major international incident. After initially lying to the world, Iranian officials finally admitted that they were responsible for shooting down a commercial airliner that claimed the lives of 176 innocent people. The Iranian people rightfully objected to this horrific decision by their own leadership. This is a leadership that just a few months ago killed 1,500 protesters for simply coming out to have a voice, a freedom of speech. America should stand with anyone in the world who craves freedom. We have a long history of doing that. That's why I introduced a resolution in support of the protesters, condemning the leadership of Iran for shooting down and killing 176 innocent people. This is not a political issue. This is a time that will test this Congress. Does it stand with those in the world who crave freedom? America is so much more than a country. America is an idea. And an idea that's so powerful, it can unite those that's under a regime in Iran to crave the freedoms that America inspires. From Hong Kong to Taiwan to Tehran. This is an opportunity for this Congress to put politics aside. An opportunity for what the Founding Fathers craved and built. An idea that we will be able not only maintain it in this nation, but grow it around the world. This is a moment for this leadership to act. This is a chance of bipartisanship. This is a chance to change the course of what we gave a message to Iran government last week. I know there were those out there that thought somehow Iran would unite, but no, quite the opposite. They crave the freedom in which we inspire to show. So I ask all members to sign on, and this bill should be voted on. I know we just heard from Speaker Pelosi that she will be moving the managers, which we had hoped for months ago. I know within her own leadership there were questions about why she held it. No one questions about what she gained, was nothing. But if there's anyone who gained from this, it'd be anybody who's running for president that's not in the U.S. Senate. With Iowa quickly upon us in early February, those 4 senators who are running for president will now no longer have a voice. Interesting to me if I'd see the Democrat National Committee ask those who are not senators to not campaign while the others cannot. I know what happened 4 years ago. Something no one thought would. That the head of a complete party of the Democrat National Committee resigning the day before, actually the night before the nominating convention. Why? Because emails came out to show that one of the main campaigners, Senator Bernie Sanders, was cheated. They had a process in there where they have superdelegates. Superdelegates are the insurance policy for the establishment to determine who can become the nominee. Because of this horrific act, the Democrat National Committee actually removed superdelegates on the first round. So Senator Sanders actually has a chance to win. But not now that Nancy Pelosi has held these documents. There was nothing gained. It goes against everything she said. But if you look at the true political nature of why, to harm one campaign and give a benefit to another. The only rightful thing of Joe Biden is to make a pledge not to campaign what Bernie Sanders cannot after what the Democrat National Committee had done to his campaign a few short years ago. Open it up for questions. Yes, ma'am.
There's been some push from Senate Republicans for the president to delay the State of the Union until after impeachment ends. Do you think that that's the right move?
Look, I leave it up to the president. The unfortunate part is the speaker controls the invitation of when it comes. We've watched the Speaker play politics with it before. We know how weak this impeachment is. I think the President is above it all. If the President decides to come during that time, rightfully so. Every time the President has given a State of the Union, I think it's been overwhelmingly uplifting to this nation. The guests that he brings, the accomplishments that we have been able to achieve together. I would have hoped that had the Speaker actually moved the documents when she said she would, this would not even be in question. Yes, ma'am.
Can I get your reaction to some comments made by Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau yesterday? He sat down for an interview and he said, had tensions not escalated in the Middle East, he believed that the 57 Canadians who died in that Ukrainian plane crash would be at home with their families. I'm just wondering if I get your response to that, as well as growing concern in Canada that the escalation of those tensions is the reason why there are so many dead Canadians.
The reason why there are 106 dead people, innocent, is because Iran shot a missile and shot down a commercial liner. The reason why anything escalated, because Iran went and bombed tankers. Iran shot down a U.S. drone. Iran did something much different, killed a U.S. citizen. Iran went and attacked our embassy. So yes, I agree that Iran is escalating things in the Middle East. I think for one moment in time, for one snapshot here, you'd have to sit back and give this president credit. Yeah, what happened? Iran, for the first time, had de-escalated, which they had not done in the last year. Trudeau was right about what Iran has been doing. And Iran is wrong, and that's why that resolution should be on the floor. And that's why that resolution should pass.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up? He said that it was generally tensions. He didn't specifically say Iran or the U.S. My other follow-up is that Justin Trudeau also said in that same interview that he would have preferred if the Trump administration had given Canada a heads up that there was going to be a strike targeting Soleimani, given that Canada has troops in the region and is a partner in the coalition to fight ISIS in that region. Do you think Canada should have been given a heads up?
I think Soleimani should have been killed, rightfully so. I think more than 600 Gold Star families believe the same thing. I think it should have happened a long time ago. I think had Soleimani been held accountable for his actions for the decades before, this escalation would have never gone. The American would have been alive. The embassy would not have been attacked. The drone would not have been shot down. The refinery in Saudi Arabia would not have been bombed. The 2 tankers would not have been bombed. And the buildup of all the other terrorist activities in all the other countries would not have taken place. Have we learned nothing back in 1998 when we had a moment in time to take out bin Laden? So yes, the president made the right decision. And Trudeau did not have to mention Iran because the facts are purely on Iran. It's interesting to me that when I hear on the floor of the House just last week when we talked about some of these ideas, President Trump's natural instincts is to put America first. But some of those on the other side of the aisle, their instincts is to blame America first. There's no blame here for America. America stood up once again for freedom. Iran went past a red line they had not gone before, killing a U.S. citizen. Iran shot down a commercial, innocent airliner. There's no doubt where the blame lies. And there's no doubt why the resolution should pass. Thank you all very much.
Right, as well as, of course, Catherine Clark. We had a very robust discussion at the caucus this morning on a few different topics. There will be a resolution of disapproval related to a rule that has been proffered by the Department of Education and Secretary Betsy DeVos that would restrict the ability of individual Americans who have been defrauded as it relates to their pursuit for higher education. There's $1.5 trillion of student debt that exists in this nation. It is an anchor around the aspirations, the hopes, the dreams, and the ability of younger Americans to be entrepreneurial, to start a family, to purchase a home, and to live the American dream. And so we're going to take action this week as it relates to that proposed rule by Secretary DeVos. We had a discussion about that. We also had a discussion about what was taking place in Puerto Rico in terms of the malpractice of the administration. The people of Puerto Rico, American citizens who have died in war after war on behalf of our great country, but right now have suffered through the intensity of a devastating hurricane and now earthquakes and aftershocks. Children are unable to go to school. Hospitals are not necessarily receiving patients. The people of Puerto Rico are in distress, and yet the administration refuses to spend a dime in congressionally allocated money to help out American citizens in Puerto Rico. Shame on this administration. It's an absolute disgrace, and we will continue to escalate pressure on them to do the right thing. We, of course, had a discussion that was led by Speaker Pelosi, along with Chairman Nadler and Chairman Schiff, about the next steps in the impeachment proceeding. The Speaker indicated, with the full consent of the caucus, that those articles of impeachment, 1, abuse of power, 2, obstruction of Congress, will be transmitted to the Senate at some point tomorrow. The Speaker indicated that at some point between the moment that we are in right now and the resolution being debated on the floor, that individual impeachment managers will be named. We are going to keep the focus on the stunning, corrupt abuse of power engaged in by Donald Trump, who pressured a foreign government to target an American citizen for political gain, and at the same time withheld without justification $391 million in military aid to a vulnerable Ukraine as part of a geopolitical shakedown scheme. That is why Donald Trump has been impeached, because he abused his power and obstructed a constitutionally inspired impeachment inquiry. And in America, no one is above the law, not even the President of the United States of America. The next step is simple. The Senate should conduct a fair trial. A fair trial involves witnesses and documents. What is the President hiding from the American people? Donald Trump said it was a perfect call. If it was in fact a perfect call, we should hear from Mick Mulvaney about that call and the actions that preceded it and followed. We should hear from John Bolton about that July 25th phone call and the geopolitical shakedown scheme that the President was engaged in to advance his own personal and political gain. The American people deserve a fair trial in the Senate. At the same time, we are going to continue our relentless focus to get things done on behalf of everyday Americans. Our relentless focus to drive down the high cost of life-saving prescription drugs. Our relentless focus to protect more than 100 million Americans with pre-existing conditions against the President's efforts, notwithstanding his lies about health care. We're going to continue our relentless focus to strengthen the Affordable Care Act, to enact the real infrastructure plan, and defend our democracy. And with that, let me yield to our Vice Chair, Katherine Clark.
Thank you, Chairman Jeffries, and good morning. The articles of impeachment boil down to this president putting his own political gain over that of the interests of the American people. And what we see in the bills that are sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk is an extension of that. These are not talking points. They are policies that directly impact American families and could save American lives. Every day that Mitch McConnell holds up background check legislation, we lose 100 Americans to gun violence. Every day that Mitch McConnell holds up expanding health care and pursues court case to undo the ACA, 82 million Americans with pre-existing conditions worry about their ability to protect their families. Every day that Mitch McConnell stonewalls the Dream and Promise Act, 700,000 dreamers are left with their future in limbo. Every day Mitch McConnell delays the Raise the Wage Act, 33 million Americans, including 20 million women, are denied a raise. Every minute Mitch McConnell obstructs VAWA, the Violence Against Women Act, nearly 20 people are physically abused by an intimate partner. With every denial, delay, and obstruction, his allegiance to Donald Trump and special interests becomes clearer and clearer. This week, House Democrats will once again stand with the American people, passing legislation to protect older Americans from discrimination and to stop our students from being defrauded. Our message to the American people is that we will never stop working for you. Our message to Mitch McConnell is no one is fooled about where your allegiances lie. It is my privilege to be able to welcome two of our DPCC co-chairs, and I will hand it over to Matt Cartwright.
Thank you, Vice Chair Clark and Chairman Jeffries. Ladies and gentlemen, the current House majority was won because we promised to work for the people, for the regular, working, ordinary American people. That's who we promised to stick up for, and this is a promise that we've been keeping. We promised to clean up government. H.R. 1 takes bold steps in that direction. We promised to bring down the skyrocketing costs of pharmaceutical medications. We've done that. We promised to fight the current administration's efforts to dismantle health care for people with pre-existing conditions. It was astonishing when we learned last spring that the Attorney General of the United States, William Barr, decided to throw the full weight of our American Justice Department behind an effort to invalidate the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. I was astonished to learn that, and when I asked the Attorney General myself, what happens if you win the lawsuit, what's your plan? He said, well, that's not our department. And Vice Chair Clark is right. We're talking about upwards of 80 million Americans. I've heard as high as 130 million Americans with pre-existing conditions who are left on tenterhooks while we wait for the Fifth Circuit and the District Court in that case to sort things out. But the Justice Department is pushing to take their protections away. It's astonishing, with no plan to replace it. We've done these things, and we have worked for the kitchen table, pocketbook issues for ordinary Americans. We have passed, for the first time in 10 years, a raise in the minimum wage. We can talk all day about the unemployment rate, but what you really want to know about is whether people can clothe and feed and shelter themselves and their families on what they make. And what we know is that they have to do it on more than one job unless we raise the minimum wage. We've done that. We have passed the FAIR Act, which helps people in employment situations protect their rights to go to court by invalidating forced arbitration clauses in employment agreements. So people with harassment in the workplace issues, wage theft issues, and a whole range of other people who have had their rights to go to court taken away, the FAIR Act, Hank Johnson's bill that we passed, remedies that situation. And we passed the USMCA. After a whole year of Richie Neal's tireless efforts to meet with the Mexicans, to meet with the Canadians, and strengthen what was given to us by the administration. Take out, for example, a completely superfluous and unnecessary provision that unnaturally jacks up pharmaceutical prices. Canada didn't ask for that. Mexico didn't ask for that. Who asked for that? Big Pharma asked for it, and we took it out to pass USMCA, a bill that helps American workers and American farmers. We did that, the Democratic House. So I'm here to say, ladies and gentlemen, we've done these things. These are just examples of the 275-plus bipartisan bills that we have passed out of the House that sit unattended on the desk of Senator Mitch McConnell, who has vowed not even to look at these things, let alone pass them or take them up or negotiate them. It's a sin. What he's doing, and he's doing it all with a view toward forwarding this false narrative that this is a do-nothing House. It's a do-nothing Senate Majority Leader. That's what we have, and he's proud of it. So I'm here to say I'm very proud to have advanced what we promised to do, the For the People agenda, and I urge Senator McConnell, do your job. I want to turn it over to my co-chair, Ted Lieu of California.
Thank you, Congressman Cartwright, and thank you, Chairman Jeffries and Vice Chair Clark, for having us here today. Like millions of Americans, I now also have a pre-existing condition, and I also get my health care through Obamacare. And the Trump administration is suing to eliminate health coverage for Americans with pre-existing conditions. And as Congressman Cartwright said, if that lawsuit succeeds, they have no plan. That means millions of Americans will lose their health care coverage, including those who rely on it for their pre-existing conditions. We're going to put people's lives at stake. And the Affordable Care Act does more than cover pre-existing conditions. It also applies to people who have employer-based health care and strengthens those plans. So before the Affordable Care Act, you could, in fact, go bankrupt, let's say, if you had a cancer diagnosis or something that caused a lot of money, because insurance companies could put in maximum coverage benefits in those employer-based health care plans. The ACA eliminated that for insurance companies, so as a result, everyone is covered regardless of what kind of health symptoms they may have or health diseases. If that goes away, again, it puts millions of people's lives at stake and could force them to go into bankruptcy. So in addition to the ACA, Republicans are also holding up bills that would help lower prescription drug prices and generic drug prices. Last year, the House of Representatives passed on a bipartisan basis a large number of bills to lower generic drug prices, and then we passed H.R. 3, which will lower prescription drug prices. They're all sitting on Senator McConnell's desk. And I'm going to conclude now about veterans bills. So in addition to health care, we've also passed at least 25 bipartisan veterans bills that help veterans combat suicide, bills that help veterans get jobs and transition easier, bills that are common sense. Some of them have Republican sponsors. Some of them are Republican bills. Many of them have Republican counterparts in the Senate. They're all sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk. So we're simply asking the U.S. Senate to do their job, put these bills up for a vote, and then move the American family forward. Thanks so much for having me here.
Thank you, Ted. Thank you, Matt. Questions?
Everyone's going to have lots of impeachment questions, so I'm going to start with Puerto Rico. What can you do? What are you considering?
That's greatly appreciated, by the way.
What can you do and what are you considering, and what are the options to get aid moving to Puerto Rico?
Yeah, we're going to have a series of conversations led by the Speaker, Steny Hoyer, with substantial leadership and involvement from Congressman Darren Soto, of course, Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez, who spoke with great passion today about the crisis confronting the people in Puerto Rico, we're going to use an all-hands-on-deck approach. And the president's refusal to spend a dime on these American citizens who are in peril is just a stunning abdication of his responsibility. It's unacceptable, it's un-American, and it's unconscionable, and we're going to make those points loudly and clearly to the American people. We're also going to explore our legal options, as well as the options that we have available as a separate and co-equal branch of government. In fact, a first amongst equals as it relates to our placement in Article 1 and the origination clause of the Constitution, which gives Congress and the House the sole power of the purse. And the president, again, is once again behaving like an authoritarian dictator, and it's shameful.
Can I just...
Yeah.
I just wanted to add to that about Puerto Rico, where we have 3.5 million Americans waiting for this government, for their U.S. government to respond to their needs. We had a hearing on appropriations back in the fall, where we had the Trump administration come in after they missed their legal requirement to release the aid that had been appropriated by September, to begin the process of putting this aid into the hands of Puerto Ricans. They had no answer for why this was not being done. And so, as the chairman said, we are also going to explore our legal options on ways to force this administration to abide by the law, by what Congress has appropriated, and to do right by the Americans that live in Puerto Rico.
I have two related questions. One is, does the House have any plans to subpoena Bolton? And the news about the Burisma cyber attack, how does that influence or have any role or impact on impeachment and this broader story?
You know, two very important questions. There has been no decision made as it relates to whether the House will consider subpoenaing John Bolton. Nothing has been ruled in, nothing has been ruled out. But at the present moment, the ball is in the Senate's court. And as was detailed in an extraordinary fashion by Ted Lieu and Matt Cartwright, what is the Senate doing such that they don't have time on the calendar to hear from witnesses like John Bolton and Mick Mulvaney? We have sent over 400 bills, 275 of which are bipartisan in nature. We've sent over bills to protect people with pre-existing conditions, strengthen the Affordable Care Act, drive down the high cost of life-saving prescription drugs, address the gun violence epidemic, reauthorize the Violence Against Women's Act, defend the Dreamers and create a pathway towards citizenship, increase pay for everyday Americans, confront the climate crisis, defend our democracy, end the era of voter suppression once and for all. The Senate is not taking up any of those bills. What are they doing? Such that they do not have time, apparently, to hear from John Bolton or Mick Mulvaney or review documents. It's part of a cover-up because Moscow Mitch and the Senate Republicans cannot defend President Trump's stunning abuse of power and his shakedown scheme in pressuring a foreign government to target an American citizen. We are going to look at the most recent revelation as it relates to Russia's cyber attack on Burisma and entities within a sovereign Ukraine. But as the Speaker has indicated on several occasions, all roads seem to lead to Putin as it relates to this administration. And Vladimir Putin appears to be at it again as it relates to potentially manufacturing evidence to interfere in our election in 2020 to help his buddy Donald Trump again be artificially placed in 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. That would be a disgrace.
And my wife is from Brooklyn.
Yeah. Brooklyn is always in the house. Okay. All right. Cheryl, don't spoil the party here.
Republican leader McCarthy indicated that he thought that Joe Biden should suspend his campaign if we're going to have 4 Democratic senators running for president having to sit. Is there...
Who said that?
Kevin McCarthy.
Who?
He's not from Bolton. Okay. Is there any indication, do you think that there's any fair way to do this across the board for the DNC and the Democratic Party if you're going to have the bulk of your field here, that there's any way to say, all right, how do we handle this as a party so that each of those candidates get the fairest field if they have duties across the board?
Yeah, I'm going to yield to my colleagues. We're going to continue, hopefully as a party, to affirmatively talk about creating prosperity in every single zip code for every single American. That's what the Democratic Party is all about. We will not take political advice from Kevin McCarthy. I yield to my colleagues.
Me neither.
Is there a concern about being fair to the other candidates if they have responsibilities over the trial?
Well, I would just say that I think that the senators who are running for president are perfectly clear, unlike the Republican senators, where their oath of office is. It's to the Constitution. They will be there. They will do what they are supposed to do, and they will take that oath of impartiality with a clear conscience.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that is I think the House Democrats have really provided a great model for this, because at the time that we engaged in our impeachment inquiry and our final impeachment vote, all throughout that we also had one of the most successful and productive House sessions in modern history, passing nearly 400 and slightly over 400 pieces of legislation, 275 bipartisan bills that address the urgent priorities of the American people. So I think we can have the same confidence that our Senate colleagues will do both things, continue to deliver on the commitments they've made to the American people, as well as hold this president accountable and fulfill both responsibilities.
We're going to go back to the front row, but I want to be fair. Yeah.
Mr. Jeffries, we reported yesterday that the administration is preparing to transfer another $7 billion from border wall construction out of military construction at this point. And should you guys have fought harder to include language preventing them from transferring that money in the recent appropriations legislation?
Well, our options as it relates to dealing with Donald Trump's relentless and reckless effort to build an unnecessary and medieval border wall. Clearly, this is another example of Donald Trump trying to fulfill a political promise that he made to crowds to do with the safety and security of the American people. It was an issue that was briefly discussed in the caucus meeting today. Those discussions will certainly continue.
One question on impeachment, one not on impeachment. Not on impeachment, what's your response to this idea now that not only did State Department officials not notify, but also President Trump saying it doesn't matter anymore if it doesn't imminent or not? And then on impeachment, can you talk about the importance of the role of the impeachment managers, this sort of high stakes that they have in terms of trying to make their case in the Senate, and whether you think you do a good job at this point?
I have no expectation to serve as an impeachment manager. I have a day job, and I look forward to continuing in that day job as chair of this tremendous House Democratic Caucus to continue to advance our For the People agenda, keep the focus on health care, infrastructure, and, of course, cleaning up corruption in Washington. Anyone else want to respond to that particular question?
And the importance of the role of these managers. It's a high-stakes situation right now.
Yeah. Well, we have a tremendous number of very capable individuals, particularly who serve on the Intel Committee and the Judiciary Committee, led by Chairman Adam Schiff, as well as Chairman Jerry Nadler. It's my expectation, though it's the Speaker's call, and we have complete confidence in her, that Chairman Schiff and Chairman Nadler will play a prominent role in carrying the message over in the Senate in the context of a trial. There are also two very distinguished members of the Judiciary Committee who are here today, who I would expect, or certainly would be tremendous impeachment managers. But again, that is a question to be addressed by Speaker Pelosi. We'll get to the second.
I want to add my 2 cents to the question about consulting with Congress. It's a disappointment to me that the administration feels the need to bend over backwards not to consult with the Congress. I don't know why they do that. There are, at least with the Gang of Eight, I mean, you think about the breadth of experience and the wisdom and the knowledge that these people could add to the discussion. And for the administration to assume oppose what the administration leans toward, it's a fallacy. It's short, and it's a disappointment to me that they do that.
So both the Attorney General and the President have suggested that imminence isn't required. I urge both of them to declare war. So before the President can engage in warlike actions, he has to get an authorization for the use of force. There's only 2 that Congress has passed: 2001 AUMF, 2002 AUMF. One applies to Iraq, and the other applies to terrorists connected to 9/11, none of which would have authorized the use of force by Donald Trump. As a result, the only other way the President can use force is for self-defense under Article 2 of the Constitution. That requires imminence. So for the President and the Attorney General to say that that's no longer required, they're essentially saying they're engaging in unconstitutional, illegal actions, and that is unfortunate, and I think the American people understand it for what it is.
I just wanted to add that we talked about in caucus today that the 4 founding fathers foresaw that we may have a rogue president, which we do. But what they didn't foresee is that Congress would also be rogue. And what we are seeing is an abdication by my colleagues across the aisle to our role in asserting in a democracy, under the way our Constitution framework works, is that we are the ones who can declare war. We have the power of appropriations and the purse. And we have to stick up for that. And we have to assert that role and protect it, because it is vital to protecting the American people. And it is a system that works together. But you have to remember that we pledge allegiance to a republic and not to a specific president.
One thing. I think one thing is also important to remember is part of the reason congressional approval and consultation is required is because you want Congress to ask the tough questions. Will this action make the American people safer? Will it strengthen American national security interests around the world? And that the absence of those tough questions is what invites mistakes or a failure to understand the broad implications of an action. I think that's what we're seeing. So this is not just about congressional authority, which is clearly present, but it's really about making certain that when you make such a solemn decision to use military force to begin a war, that it be done after careful deliberation with all the hard questions asked. That did not happen in this case.
And to wrap this up, and then I'll go to you, Cheryl, but Congress is a separate and co-equal branch of government. We don't work for this president or any president. We work for the American people. We have a constitutional responsibility to serve as a check and balance on a potentially out-of-control executive branch. That is the formula that the framers of the Constitution came up with, because they didn't want a monarch, they didn't want a dictator, they didn't want a king, they wanted a democratic republic. There is nothing more important than issues of war and peace. That is why Article 1 of the Constitution makes clear that Congress has the sole authority to declare war. As my colleagues have indicated, the only exception to that, in the absence of an authorization for the use of military force, is an imminent threat to the safety and well-being of Americans. The president has now proclaimed that doesn't matter. He essentially has indicated he's a king, he's a dictator, he's a monarch. And he can start a war if he wants it, without consultation or the approval of the American people. That is a stunningly unconstitutional admission that he has made to the American people. And people of goodwill, Democrats, Republicans, and independents should be shocked by the behavior that we're seeing from this president, and the fact that he's willing to lie, apparently, about the alleged nature of the threat that prompted him to strike General Soleimani. No one that I've spoken to has seen any evidence, apparently including the Secretary of the Department of Defense, that there were 4 specific embassies that were under imminent threat.
So the Speaker indicated that she was withholding the articles of impeachment in order to, in essence, get Mitch McConnell to commit to witnesses and documents. And he hasn't done that. So what's changed to make her decide to send these articles over now?
Well, the Speaker never indicated that her objective was to get Mitch McConnell to change his behavior. She made it clear that part of our objective collectively as House Democrats was to make sure there was a fair trial in the Senate. There's a distinction, because as it relates to the trial proceedings, unlike Mitch McConnell's ability essentially to block all of the bills that we have passed in the House on behalf of everyday Americans to make life better for them, he has that singular ability in the Senate. Mitch McConnell does not have that singular ability in the context of the impeachment and removal trial, because effectively it will take 51 senators to make a decision as to what the trial would look like. And so the Speaker's decision has created space for individuals like Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, and most recently Mitt Romney, to publicly and expressly say individuals like John Bolton should testify if the Senate is going to conduct a fair trial. So we are 3/4 of the way to seeing a fair and comprehensive trial in the Senate as it relates to Donald Trump's abuse of power. That alone was a tremendous objective that has been accomplished, because what Mitch McConnell apparently wanted to do was move immediately to dismiss any impeachment articles that we sent over.
Who's the last 1/4 of that?
We'll see.
And do you think you'll get one?
Hope springs eternal.
That doesn't sound very optimistic.
We'll see what happens in the Senate, but I think there's been substantial movement. That's a good thing, and we still need to hear from individuals like Martha McSally, Joni Ernst, as well as Cory Gardner, of course, amongst several others, Lamar Alexander. There are any number of individuals who hopefully decency will prevail.
Michael Bloomberg told us in Texas over the weekend he might spend up to $1 billion of his own dollars, even if he's not the nominee, to help the party, to help whoever the candidate is. Wonder what you feel about that much money from one individual. Is there a limit? Would you be happy for $5 billion of his dollars, $20 billion, before someone becomes, as you say, a king, a dictator, and a monarch?
Well, obviously, I think that Michael Bloomberg's entry into the race, personally as a New Yorker, and I yield to all of my colleagues, has been an important step in a broad field to articulate part of the Democratic perspective amongst the ideologically gorgeous mosaic that we have from the center to the left. And the American people deserve a robust discussion, because we're in a very challenging moment about how we move the country forward. And Michael Bloomberg will have a lot to say in that regard. The way the current campaign finance laws are written, he's got the First Amendment right to spend his resources in a manner that he deems appropriate, and that's a right that he's chosen to exercise on behalf of his candidacy and potentially on behalf of the effort to make sure that we move as a country in a different direction beyond Donald Trump. I support that effort to the extent that I support the fact that the country needs to move beyond this current presidency that we have right now.
Anyone else? Is there a limit to how much one individual? What do you get for $1 billion?
I mean, I would just add to the chairman's comments that, former Mayor Bloomberg is also investing substantially in voter registration efforts in key battleground states. I think his commitment to spend what he has earned in his lifetime is a recognition of his assessment of the danger of a second term of Donald Trump. And I think to the extent that he's willing to commit resources to make certain that the Democratic nominee, whoever it is, prevails, I'm grateful for that. And I think Mayor Bloomberg has a long record of investing in. I was a founding member of Mayors Against Illegal Guns with Mayor Bloomberg. He has a long record in investing in environmental efforts to respond to climate change. So I think this is an unusual moment in the history of our country, and I think devoting resources to ensuring that the Democratic nominee for president wins is essential.
I just want to so the House passed H.R. 1, campaign finance reform, because we saw the effect of money in politics. But until folks really get upset about Sheldon Adelson, the Koch brothers, corporate super PACs, Republican super PACs spending vast amounts of money, I simply reject the premise of your question.
You, Ted. Last question.
This is a non-impeachment question for Congressman Cicilline. Can you update us on the status of the antitrust investigation that's going on in the House? I know you had a field hearing on Friday, but when do you expect to wrap up that investigation? And are you still talking to big tech CEOs on potentially coming to testify?
Yes, so the investigation, I hope, will conclude in the first quarter of this year with the expectation that we will have a final report and a set of recommendations early enough to be able to move forward with the introduction of legislation. We have a field hearing in Colorado. We'll probably have at least one or two more hearings, maybe one additional roundtable. What has been very exciting is this has really been a bipartisan effort, and the expectation is, while we may not agree on every solution, that we'll have a set of proposals that enjoy bipartisan support. And as I've said throughout the investigation, it is hard for me to imagine we would complete this investigation without hearing from some of the key CEOs of the major technology companies. They have all pledged to cooperate, and they have been in terms of document productions and other things. So it is my expectation that some set of CEOs will be heard from before the investigation is completely concluded.
Yeah, House Democrats, we're gonna continue to fight for working families, middle class folks, and senior citizens. We're going to continue to fight for the poor, the sick, and the afflicted. We're going to continue to fight for the least, the lost, and the left behind. We're going to continue to defend our democracy. We're going to continue to fight for the people. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.